Number 15. Kylie Rexan Mot. In April 2016, a 28-year-old English teacher from Huntington, Texas, was arrested for allegedly sending explicit photos of herself to a former student via Snapchat. According to law enforcement, Kylie Rexan Mot. Confessed to sending 2 explicit photos to the victim, who deleted the content from his phone. Other students reportedly screenshotted the material and spread it around the school, prompting the investigation that led to Mott's arrest. 4 months later, Mot pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor count of distributing harmful material. And as part of a plea deal, she received a 2-year deferred adjudication sentence, which is similar to probation and typically enables someone to avoid a conviction as long as they follow certain rules set forth by the court. It's also likely safe to assume that her 3.5-year teaching career ended when the allegations against her were brought to light. Number 14. Jeree. When her teacher's salary wasn't enough to make ends meet, Jeree began selling explicit photos on OnlyFans. By day, the single mother of 2 from South Bend, Indiana, taught for a government-sponsored youth outreach program called Starbase. But outside her day job, she uploaded exclusive content to her OnlyFans account, where subscribers paid for access to the material. Jeree would later tell reporters that it was no secret to people at her workplace that she was struggling financially. In fact, her adult content reflected just one of several side gigs she picked up in an attempt to stay afloat after her money troubles pushed her into low-income housing. Her situation only worsened considerably, though, in early 2022, when her photos were leaked to her superiors at Starbase. She was fired from her teaching job and did the next logical thing by dedicating more of her time and energy to building her brand as an adult model. In the months following Jeree's job loss, news headlines reported that she was making as much as $17,000 per month on OnlyFans, making it sound like she'd come out on the winning end of the ordeal. However, it was later revealed that she'd actually gone broke. Jeree told Yahoo Lifestyle that she never planned to leave teaching or to turn OnlyFans into her primary source of income. She accused a right-wing blogger of paying for her photos and then using them to get her fired. She even claimed that her boss had encouraged her to start an OnlyFans page. More than a year after being fired, Jeree admitted that her situation didn't turn out like many other fired teachers who make news headlines for making fortunes by selling adult content. She described the income as up and down and seemed extremely unhappy about how her life was going. But for now, she's still working as an OnlyFans model. Number 13. Omar Mukud. Members of the medical community were shocked in December 2022 when a well-respected Cleveland clinic doctor was accused of assaulting at least 3 patients over a 6-month period earlier that year. 65-year-old gastroenterologist Omar Mukud was fired following an internal investigation, and he now faces 24 criminal charges, including 18 counts of gross imposition and 6 counts of unlawful restraint. In October 2023, Mukud pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, which typically means that a person isn't denying what happened but maintains that they were not mentally capable of understanding the wrongfulness of their actions. His trial was originally scheduled for November 2023, but the case appears to be ongoing. According to the most recent available update, Mukud remains free on bail pending the outcome of a psychological evaluation. Number 12. Jose Arizer. After filing for bankruptcy in 2010, U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration agent Jose Ismail Arizer underwent a fundamental change in thinking that caused him to go rogue. According to federal authorities, he began using his job position to divert large amounts of cash from money laundering investigations to himself and several colleagues for personal use. Over 7 years, he funneled more than $9 million into bank accounts controlled by himself and his co-conspirators. Arizer received at least $1 million in bribes and kickbacks for himself, which he then used to finance an extravagant lifestyle that included jewelry, luxury cars and travel, fine dining, primo seats at sports games, a house in Colombia, and other trappings of an upscale lifestyle that he couldn't afford on his own earnings. The corrupt agents also allegedly blew a considerable amount of the ill-gotten funds partying with strippers and prostitutes at clubs and aboard yachts. Arizer resigned from his job in 2018 after his superiors became suspicious of his activity. In 2020, he and his wife, Natalia Gomez Arizer, were arrested for their roles in the scheme. Gomez Arizer was accused of laundering the stolen money through a shell company that was registered to the couple's home address and had no employees. She pleaded guilty to a federal conspiracy to launder charge and was sentenced to 5 years on probation. Arizer pleaded guilty to 19 counts, including conspiracy to commit money laundering, wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft, and as a result, he was sentenced to more than 12 years in federal prison. During a tell-all interview with the Associated Press shortly before he began his prison sentence, Arizer said that he wasn't the mastermind of the scheme, even though he was essentially charged and treated as such. He depicted a much bigger operation consisting of other agents, as well as prosecutors, informants, and even cartel members. The 48-year-old told the AP that he and his accomplices had free access to do as they pleased, enabling them to plan their travels around sport events, their chosen vacation destinations, and their money laundering activities. Arizer explained that his crimes began after he and his co-workers realized that the so-called war on drugs is unwinnable, and that even their best efforts wouldn't even make a dent in stopping the flow of illicit substances across international lines. He even went as far as calling the war on drugs a very fun game that he admittedly played a hand in. Until relatively recently, Arizer's DEA colleagues claimed that he was telling an exaggerated tale in order to implicate others and in hopes of receiving a lenient sentence. But the Department of Justice is reportedly starting to take his claims seriously. As of late 2022, several of the people Arizer named in his accounts to interrogators had been questioned by federal investigators. During Arizer's sentencing hearing, the judge agreed that other DEA agents needed to be investigated, telling prosecutors that it was apparent that others were involved in the corruption. But so far, no additional arrests have been made. Number 11. Jillian Philip. In 2020, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling fell under widespread criticism for expressing unpopular views about the transgender community, and since then she stood by her beliefs, claiming that she doesn't support transgender discrimination, but that she feels her life experiences as a biological female have shaped her in ways that a male-to-female transgender person can't relate to. Shortly after the controversy broke, best-selling children's author Jillian Philip put the hashtag #StandWithJK Rowling in her Twitter bio as a show of support. She was quickly dropped from her contract with a major publisher and was thrust out of her profession overnight after activists demanded that the company let her go. In the meantime, Philip reportedly received death threats and was harassed relentlessly on social media. The 59-year-old now works as a truck driver. During a 2023 interview with a podcast produced by the Free Speech Union, Philip blamed cancel culture for her career loss. She quipped back against claims that cancel culture isn't real by touting herself as a living, breathing victim of it. Philip further argued that women hesitate to participate in the so-called trans debate because they're afraid that activists will target them. The ousted writer described the alleged attack on people who share Rowling's views as the product of a witch hunt and a mob mentality. As of late 2023, Philip was in the process of raising money to appeal an employment tribunal ruling that the publisher didn't wrongfully fire her. The crowdfunding campaign has exceeded its £35,000 goal, but the outcome remains to be seen. Number 10. James Edward Smith II. Florida state authorities launched an investigation into former pastor James Edward Smith II in April 2022 after receiving complaints about suspected financial fraud. The 49-year-old married father of four had served as the pastor of New Jerusalem Baptist Church in Pompano Beach from 2011 until 2021, when he was let go for unspecified reasons. According to investigators, Smith forged documents to give himself sole control over the church property. And a few months after being fired, he allegedly sold the property for $600,000 and put the money into bank accounts that were opened under the church's name. He's accused of using the proceeds to support an out-of-control drug habit. During a search of Smith's home, agents found methamphetamine, heroin, marijuana, hypodermic needles, smoking pipes, a scale with residue, and a gun that had been reported stolen 5 years earlier. He now faces a handful of serious charges, including using an ID without consent to commit fraud or impersonation in excess of $50,000. He was also hit with charges of filing false documents in a scheme to defraud, grand theft in the first degree, and methamphetamine possession. Smith's criminal record reportedly dates back decades, and according to his biography on the church's website, he leaned on his faith to get through trying times. But it unfortunately appears as though he was also dealing with his problems by self-medicating. For now, he remains held without bail at the Broward County Jail while awaiting his trial. Number 9. Shawn Bridges. In 2011, an online drug marketplace called the Silk Road went live on the dark web. The following year, the US government assembled an investigative task force in hopes of taking down the large-scale dealer, which shipped products worldwide and included a myriad of drugs in its inventory. One of the team members, Secret Service agent Shawn Bridges, stole at least $800,000 worth of Bitcoin from Silk Road drug dealers after arresting one of the website's administrators. In 2014, investigators seized the remaining $600,000 from a personal account belonging to Bridges. He was charged with money laundering and wire fraud several months later and resigned from the Secret Service the following day. As part of a plea agreement, Bridges pleaded guilty to money laundering and obstruction of justice in August 2015. He was sentenced to 71 months in federal prison with a scheduled surrender date in early 2016. He was also ordered to pay more than $1.1 million in restitution. The day before Bridges was scheduled to turn himself in, he was arrested at his home in Maryland. Authorities initially declined to reveal many details about the arrest, but court documents showed that investigators found bags filled with identity documents, Bridges' passport, a thumb drive, a cell phone, and financial records for 3 offshore entities. The findings indicated that Bridges may have been planning to flee the country and that the authorities may have stopped him just in time. In 2017, Bridges pleaded guilty to additional money laundering counts for continuing to steal money after entering his first plea agreement. During his sentencing hearing, he tearfully acknowledged that he was responsible for putting himself in the situation he was in. He went on to describe prison life as torturous and isolated, claiming that he spent 99% of his time alone and was given almost no opportunities to pass the time productively. Bridges' parents urged the judge for leniency, noting how their son's wife had recently divorced him and was pleading for a fair chance for him to get his life on track. The judge honored the defense's request for an additional 2-year sentence, falling short of the 3 years the prosecution asked for. Bridges was released in 2021 and now appears to be leading a quiet existence out of the spotlight. Number 8. Kimberly Coats. A third-grade teacher in Perkins, Oklahoma, was yanked from the classroom on the very first day of the 2023 school year for allegedly being extremely drunk on the job. School administrators confronted 53-year-old Kimberly Coats inside a conference room with a police officer present after noticing her unusual behavior. Bodycam footage showed a staff member asking Coats if she'd taken medication or anything else that would cause her to act differently. She said that she took anxiety medication, but suspicions about her substance use lingered. Coats denied drinking on the job, claiming that she drank a half box of wine the previous night. However, when a breathalyzer test revealed a blood alcohol content 3 times the legal limit for driving, she stuck to her claim that she hadn't drunk since she went to bed at 3 a.m. The police officer said that he didn't believe it was possible for Coats to have such a high BAC unless she drank more recently. He further pointed out that several people said she was acting fine earlier that day, indicating that she got drunk after arriving at the school. A test of her eye movement further showed that she was intoxicated. When confronted about what was in the cup she brought to school with her, Coats claimed it was filled with juice, but in actuality it was filled with wine. She claimed the cup was from the day before, which didn't make the situation any better. Coats was given the choice to call someone for a ride away from the property or be arrested. Meanwhile, the school superintendent said that he planned to fire her and that her only other choice would be to resign first. She ended up being taken into custody on a public intoxication charge. 3 months later, Coats allegedly showed up drunk at a court hearing. According to records, a deputy noticed that she was unsteady and weaving, with slurred speech and glassy eyes as she grabbed a wall and a railing to stabilize herself. In a body cam video captured at the courthouse, she could be heard claiming that she'd only had one drink that day. Coats was hit with another public intoxication charge, and her case appears to be ongoing. Number 7. Connor Bowman. 32-year-old Mayo Clinic pharmacist Betty Bowman died 4 days after being admitted to a hospital in Rochester, Minnesota with mysterious symptoms in August 2023. Her husband, 30-year-old poison specialist Dr. Connor Bowman, allegedly told people that she died from a rare illness, and her obituary stated that she'd succumbed to a sudden autoimmune sickness. In reality, authorities had labeled Betty's death as suspicious and had stopped Connor from cremating her body so they could further investigate. According to the medical examiner, Betty's symptoms initially mimicked food poisoning upon her arrival at the emergency room, but the treatment doctors tried were ineffective and her condition rapidly deteriorated. Her organs failed, her lungs filled with liquid, and she went into cardiac arrest. Investigators now believe that Connor Bowman fatally poisoned his wife with a gout medication called colchicine, which he allegedly researched online before Betty's death. Bowman is also accused of performing calculations to determine how much of the drug would be lethal to someone of Betty's size, and performing an internet search to see if someone's browser history could be used against them in court. According to a criminal complaint, the Bowmans were having money problems and marital issues revolving around infidelity. The couple had reportedly begun talking about a possible divorce when Betty suddenly fell ill. When Betty's symptoms began, she reportedly told a friend that she was feeling sick after drinking a smoothie that Connor had given her. After Betty's death, Connor allegedly tried cancelling her autopsy and urged the medical examiner to hurry along with her cremation. He also emailed investigators requesting a list of the substances they planned to test for, and in the meantime, he tried to cash in on a $450,000 life insurance policy in Betty's name. A toxicology test proved that Betty had a lethal amount of colchicine in her system when she died, despite not being prescribed the drug. Her death was labeled a homicide, and Connor Bowman was charged with second-degree murder. He remains behind bars on a $5 million bond and is due back in court in January 2024. Number 6. Robert Lusik. While working and living in New York State's Hudson Valley in late 2011, FBI Special Agent Robert Lusik agreed to provide confidential documents to a man named Rizva Ahmed, who was seeking to damage a political rival's career. Lusik met Ahmed through a friend in common named Johannes Thaler, who helped plot the scheme and acted as a middleman. The crooked agent and Thaler thought they were about to run into big money by procuring the documents. In one text exchange between the pair, Thaler mentioned how they would soon be dining in an oceanside restaurant. During the first exchange, Lusik gave Ahmed 2 documents in exchange for $1,000. It seemed like a good sign of things to come for Lusik and Thaler, who had their sights set on obtaining a monthly salary of $30,000 from Ahmed. But Ahmed failed to uphold his agreement to continue the arrangement. In a series of text messages that were later obtained by investigators, Lusik and Thaler discussed potential ways of getting Ahmed to cough up the money they wanted. Lusik was already frustrated, and he became even angrier after learning that Ahmed was using another insider source for information. In 2012, Lusik was charged in connection with a separate bribery scheme out of Utah. He was accused of agreeing to use his job position to try convincing authorities to drop a criminal investigation against a former Green Beret named Michael Taylor, who was being probed for suspected fraud and money laundering. According to court documents, Taylor owned a security and defense company that contracted with the government to provide services in Afghanistan. He'd fallen under suspicion of committing fraud and money laundering in connection with the contract, and was hoping that Lusik would be able to derail the investigation. Taylor also asked Lusik to get him signed on as an FBI informant, but none of these plans ever came to fruition. On the first day of his trial for the Utah case, Lusik pleaded guilty to 11 counts, including conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and more. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison as a result. The intelligence agent turned convict also pleaded guilty to the other bribery case, which he received a 5-year sentence for. And according to records, he's currently serving out his punishment at a federal prison in New York with a projected release date in 2025. Number 5. Talia Lavin. While working as a fact-checker for The New Yorker, Talia Lavin mistook an immigration and customs enforcement agent's tattoo as a Nazi symbol and tweeted photos of it. She described the artwork in question as an iron cross, which is common among white supremacists, but several military veterans were quick to point out that it looked more like a Maltese cross, which is popular among firefighters. Lavin deleted the tweet and explained her mistake in a follow-up post. And in the meantime, ICE tweeted a statement clarifying that the tattoo represents the symbol of the military platoon the agent served with in Afghanistan. The mistake went viral, and Lavin resigned from her job at The New Yorker amid the scrutiny. She also posted a tweet apologizing to Justin Gardner, the man with the tattoo, while accusing ICE of unfairly targeting her in a bid to discredit her former employer, which has a history of criticizing the agency. Lavin claimed that ICE had purposely pitted her against a disabled military veteran and villainized her to the benefit of right-wing media. Furthermore, she repeatedly pointed out how many other people had speculated about Gardner's tattoo possibly being racist before she made the career-ruining post. To some, it seemed like Lavin was playing the victim, while others agreed that her position as a New Yorker journalist made her an easy target for demonizing left-wing journalism. Lavin mentioned being broke without health insurance, and she worried about her future, but she reportedly landed work with a media company less than a month after the scandal broke, and in early 2019, news reports revealed that she'd landed a part-time teaching gig at NYU. Number 4. Doug Gerber. In September 2023, someone leaked an intimate video of Shawnee, Kansas City manager Doug Gerber to several local government employees. The disturbing clip, which showed the disgraced official sitting alone on a sofa doing inappropriate things, was sent to staff members in an anonymous email titled, "Most Important," but it's unclear who sent the video or how they obtained it. An IT worker for the city blocked the sender and issued an email to employees stating that the message had been sent by a disturbed individual trying to cause issues with the city. The scandal was kept under tight wraps until about a month later. During an email exchange with the Kansas City Star, the mysterious individual implied that they were trying to expose Gerber for his dubious and un-Catholic practices. Council President Eric Jenkins told the news outlet that Gerber had been investigated over gossip about previous impropriety before becoming the city manager 6 months earlier. He didn't elaborate on the nature of the rumors, but reassured the Star that nothing in Gerber's background gave the council a reason not to appoint him. Meanwhile, Shawnee Mayor Michelle Disler was admittedly unsurprised by news of the video, citing the previous concerns about Gerber's behavior. She accused the council of dismissing the concerns she raised about Gerber during the selection process. Gerber was initially put on leave when the scandal broke and has since been fired. Number 3. Diana Voltic. In early 2018, the Huffington Post revealed that a social studies teacher in Citrus County, Florida, had been moonlighting as the host of a white supremacist podcast. Broadcasting under the pseudonym Tiana Dalachov, 25-year-old Diana Voltic was the voice behind a podcast called Unapologetic. She also allegedly spewed racist, anti-Semitic, and anti-Muslim sentiments on Twitter and appeared to be an avid far-right conspiracy theorist. The views expressed in Volitic's shows were nothing short of horrifying and have no rightful place in modern society. She argued that certain races were scientifically proven to be more intelligent than others, making it all the more disturbing that she spent her daytime hours educating America's youth. During one episode, Voltic admitted that she tried to influence her students with her views, describing how she'd learned to know when to expect administrators and colleagues to drop by her classroom. She also mentioned how she'd successfully denied pushing a political bias on her students after a parent complained. Even more disturbingly, she called for more white supremacists to infiltrate American schools. She also featured prominent white supremacists as guests on her show, including alt-right content creator Lana Lochtef, who was banned from YouTube for violating its hate speech policies. After the Huffington Post published its exposé, Voltic set her Twitter to private and removed the link to her podcast. But by then, it was too late to scrub the internet of her racist behavior. The news outlet had captured screenshots of some of the most appalling posts, which included multiple statements denying that racism is real. And shortly after the story broke, Citrus County School District officials launched an internal investigation and placed Voltic on leave. In a statement issued through her attorney, the disgraced teacher admitted to being Tiana Dalachov, but claimed her podcasts were satirical. She said that the content didn't express her true views and that the material wasn't meant to be taken seriously. However, she resigned from her teaching job about a month later. Number 2. Richard Louie Crosby III. Ohio attorney Richard Louie Crosby III announced his plans to stop practicing law in April 2021 after the Cincinnati Bar Association filed a complaint against him. Later that year, he was charged with fraud in Hamilton County for stealing client funds. He was also disbarred while the case was pending. In the meantime, Crosby allegedly used the alias Richard Coleman Williams Jr. to land a job at a Washington, D.C. law firm. He worked there for a brief period before applying to a Miami-based law firm, claiming that he was licensed to practice law in New York and Washington, D.C. In September 2022, the firm offered him a job with a $185,000 starting salary and a $5,000 sign-on bonus. He worked there until April 2023, when the firm received a tip from a child support office in Ohio and discovered his real identity. According to authorities, Crosby had used a fake passport number, social security number, and banking information on his hiring paperwork. 2 months later, Crosby was convicted on 2 counts of felony theft and was placed on 5 years of probation. He was also ordered to pay nearly $50,000 in restitution to the law firm he was working for when he stole the money. The following month, Crosby allegedly used the Richard Williams alias to try and gain a position at a law firm in Coral Gables, Florida. He provided the interviewer with a doctored image that appeared to show the alias on a Washington, D.C. bar directory. The firm offered him a job paying $195,000 per year with a $10,000 sign-on bonus, but rescinded the offer after discovering that Crosby was using a fake identity. In October 2023, federal authorities arrested the ousted lawyer on suspicion of wire fraud, social security number fraud, and aggravated identity theft. As he waits to face his new charges, he's also landed at the center of numerous civil lawsuits, including several that have ended in judgments against him, totaling over $100,000. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear even more stories, stay tuned for some extra content that you might have missed. Number 1. John Bello Jr. At one point during his career with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, John Bello Jr. was recognized for his upstanding service as Agent of the Year. But money talks, and in 2008, the once model employee began leaking sensitive documents to a Singapore-based contractor named Leonard Glenn Francis, who supplied naval ships throughout Asia. Nicknamed Fat Leonard, Francis used the information gleaned from the files to thwart NCIS investigations amid long-standing suspicions that he was overbilling the US Navy for fuel and supplies. In exchange for the hundreds of documents he handed over, Bellevue received tens of thousands of dollars in cash bribes and was treated to lavish meals, booze-fueled parties, concert tickets, luxury travel, and services from prostitutes. The partnership lasted for 5 years and involved multiple other high-ranking NCIS agents who were swayed by Fat Leonard's offerings. In 2013, federal authorities charged Bellevue with conspiracy to commit bribery. Dozens of additional arrests followed in what would become the Navy's biggest fraud case in years. The case was especially shocking due to the senior ranking status of most of the defendants, which is reportedly rare when it comes to Navy corruption cases. Bellevue's defense lawyers depicted him as an impressionable, mentally fragile, and romantically inexperienced victim with a penchant for alcohol who became obsessed with Fat Leonard and the benefits he provided. The attorneys described their client as being under Fat Leonard's spell and entangled in what he thought was a genuine friendship. Prosecutors, on the other hand, argued that Bellevue knowingly and deliberately betrayed the United States by providing information that put confidential informants in danger tarnished the reputation of the NCIS, compromised investigations, and helped bilk the Navy out of millions of dollars. Moreover, email and text exchanges uncovered during the investigation revealed that Bellevue was fully aware of the transactional nature of his relationship with Francis. In one email he sent to Francis in 2012, Bellevue wrote that he wouldn't hand over anything else until he got what he wanted. He went on to say, "I can be your best friend or your worst enemy. I am not an amateur." Bellevue pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay $20 million in restitution to the United States Navy. As of 2018, more defendants had been charged in connection with the Fat Leonard scandal, most of whom pleaded guilty and served varying prison sentences. Hundreds of people have come under scrutiny throughout the investigation, which appears to be ongoing. The infamous Fat Leonard took a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation in the investigation, and while out on bail in September 2022, he cut off his ankle bracelet, skipped his sentencing hearing, and fled to Mexico, where he caught a flight to Cuba and then to Venezuela. Luckily, though, he was captured while trying to board a flight to Russia. Security guards who were court-ordered to oversee Francis's property 24/7 claimed that they'd been locked in a garage when he escaped. According to the most recent updates, extradition negotiations between the US and Venezuela are ongoing. But if and when he's returned to the US, he'll face up to 25 years in federal prison. Number 14. Lydia Brock. A Cleveland woman who went to the emergency room in 2023 with a possible esophagus tear and deep vein thrombosis left the facility in handcuffs after she allegedly posed as a nurse and tried to discharge two elderly patients. According to a police report, 28-year-old Lydia Brock went to Erlanger Hospital one evening in June, complaining that she was coughing up blood, and during her visit, she was accused of entering an 85-year-old man's room and telling him she was his nurse for the evening. Brock allegedly removed the senior citizen's IV and other monitoring equipment and told him that she was discharging him. But it's unclear whether she drew blood or gave the elderly patient any medication. The report further claimed that Brock proceeded to enter the room of a 69-year-old woman and once again pretended to be a nurse before beginning to remove the patient's equipment. Family members reportedly saw what was going on and intervened before the suspect could remove the woman's IV. They told police that they sent Brock out of the room and notified staff about the bizarre incident. Security guards said that while they were removing Brock from the property, they found an ID badge from the hospital in her purse, along with a collection of syringes and pills, empty prescription bottles from various doctors, and two medical flushes filled with blood. According to the affidavit, both patients that the suspect approached were in the hospital for mental health reasons and were very sick. Authorities accused Brock of putting the ailing seniors in grave danger and charged her with 2 counts each of aggravated assault, abuse to a vulnerable adult, reckless endangerment, and impersonation of a licensed professional. And additionally, she received 1 possession charge for drug paraphernalia. Records revealed that this wasn't Brock's first run-in with the police over strange behavior in medical buildings. During a previous incident at another local hospital, she allegedly drew blood from her own IV, splattered it onto her head, and claimed that she'd fallen down. According to an affidavit, police found fentanyl, syringes, and prescription lidocaine in her purse. And when confronted with the evidence, she reportedly claimed she was a nurse at another hospital. She also asserted that the medical items were from a recent shift that she'd worked and that she'd simply forgotten to get rid of them. When news of Brock's most recent arrest broke, authorities said that they were running tests to determine who the blood in her purse belonged to and if she'd given the elderly patients any medication. Under Ohio law, she's flagged for doctor shopping and has allegedly gone to at least 13 medical providers to obtain prescriptions for pills. And based on the most recent update on the case, Brock is being held behind bars at the Cuyahoga County Jail on a $20,000 bond. Number 13. Kristen Johnson. In May of 2015, a 26-year-old registered nurse named Kristen Johnson was accused of snapping photos of an unconscious male patient's genitals with her cell phone while working at a hospital in Syracuse, New York. The allegations came following a 9-month investigation and included 2 counts of felony second-degree unlawful surveillance and 1 misdemeanor count of disseminating unlawful surveillance. In addition to the disturbing pictures, the disgraced former healthcare worker was accused of recording footage of an incapacitated woman's rectum while a co-worker cleaned the patient's gastrointestinal blood clot. And according to court records, Johnson sent the video to the co-worker performing the procedure. In a statement announcing Johnson's arrest, Onondaga County District Attorney William Fitzpatrick reminded the public that, despite what certain people think, it's illegal to secretly photograph someone's private body parts. He then went on to reassure the public that the victims and their families had been notified of the incident. As a consequence, Johnson was fired from her job. She ultimately took a plea deal requiring her to surrender her nursing license in exchange for getting the felony charges against her dropped. She pleaded guilty to the misdemeanor unlawful surveillance charge and was sentenced to 3 years of probation. The agreement also required her to sign a statement acknowledging that she didn't contest to a charge that she practiced her former profession with moral unfitness. Number 12. Michelle Bogel. A licensed vocational nurse from Spring, Texas, named Michelle Bogel, made news headlines across the U.S. in November 2018 when she was accused of unlawfully administering Botox injections at her cosmetic spa. The arrest came amid a widespread crackdown on workers who were allegedly providing treatment illegally at Houston area aesthetic businesses. According to authorities, an undercover officer contacted Bogel's business for a consultation and spoke with a doctor over video chat. Police claimed that the physician didn't make any treatment recommendations before hanging up and turning the call over to Bogel, who allegedly advised the undercover officer on different types of injections, as well as how and where they'd be administered. Court documents stated that Bogel told the undercover agent that she typically saw 18 patients per day, but had seen as many as 40 in a 24-hour period. And as a result, she was arrested on suspicion of performing non-surgical medical procedures without a license, even though the cop never received any actual treatment. The spa's medical director, Dr. Paula Springer Bryant, was also accused of failing to follow proper protocols for administering cosmetic injections. However, there are always at least two sides to every story. Bogel adamantly maintained her innocence from the very beginning and never wavered during the fight to clear her name. And she was vindicated several months later when a grand jury declined to indict her on criminal allegations of unlawfully practicing medicine. After being cleared of any wrongdoing, Bogel came forward and spoke with ABC 13 about her experience. She said that she was excited about the outcome of the case and that she never had any doubt about her innocence. And in her words, she didn't want to rub it in anybody's face, but was happy that the court finding showed that she wasn't doing anything wrong. During the interview, Bogel described the law she was accused of breaking as confusing. She called for better clarification on the level of oversight that nurses are required to have from doctors while providing these types of treatment. And she also called for clarification on who's qualified to perform cosmetic injections. In addition, Bogel made it clear that she agrees with holding providers accountable for unlawful practices, but she said that plucking nurses out and splashing them on the news wasn't an effective way of tackling criminals. She described the sting that led to her dismissal case as a waste of taxpayer dollars, and based on the outcome, it seems like a valid point. And while Bogel was clearly thrilled to put the situation behind her, the favorable court decision didn't fix all of the damage that had been done to her and her family's lives. She told the news outlet that after her arrest, she lost business at her spa and was evicted from her home. A Houston police spokesperson told ABC 13 that the agency doesn't work in a vacuum and that the district attorney's office approves charges before anyone is arrested and booked into jail. The Harris County District Attorney's Office said that charging decisions are based on initial facts and that prosecutors can do additional work to clarify questions about the evidence and the law. Thankfully, it appears as though Bogel's life is back on track. And in fact, it seems as though Bogel's career has recovered and is doing better than ever. She's still a nurse and she's still performing injections at her spa. And today, she's considered to be a highly rated provider. Number 11. Charles Cullen. By the time Charles Cullen killed his first known victim in 1988, he was deep in the throes of alcoholism, mental illness, and a failing marriage. He was working as a nurse at a hospital in Livingston, New Jersey. And when a judge came into the emergency room suffering from an adverse reaction to a medication, Cullen injected a deadly dose of drugs into his IV. Nobody knows exactly how many more people he killed over the next 4 years, but the number is believed to be in the dozens. Cullen left the hospital in early 1992 after authorities discovered that many of the dead patients' IV bags were contaminated with overdoses of insulin and other deadly substances. Then a month later, he began working at a hospital in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, where he fatally overdosed 3 elderly women with the heart medication digoxin. But before she died, the third victim tried to alert staff to a sneaky male nurse who she claimed was injecting her IV while she slept. Unfortunately, though, her complaints were brushed off and ignored. The serial killer's downward spiral accelerated in 1993 when he went through a bitter divorce and spent 2 months in psychiatric hospitals. And around that same time, he began stalking a female co-worker. But he got caught and was sentenced to a year of probation for a trespassing conviction. Then, during that same year, the son of one of Cullen's elderly victims raised the alarm about his suspicions that his mother's death was unnatural. He claimed that on the night before his mother's death, she accused a male nurse of injecting something into her IV. So an investigation was launched, and authorities conducted lie detector tests on several of the hospital's nursing staff. And surprisingly, Cullen passed. During the spring of 1994, he started a new job at an intensive care unit in Hunterdon, New Jersey, and he'd later deny harming or killing any patients between then and 1996. But by the time Cullen was arrested for some of his murders in 2003, the hospital's records from those years had been destroyed. Then, between January and September of 1996, he killed at least 5 patients with digoxin overdoses. Cullen went through jobs like underwear, but it would take all day to discuss each and every position he held throughout his 15-year killing spree. Even as his mental health and employment record continued to deteriorate noticeably, he managed to find work, largely due to a nationwide shortage of nurses. So he continued to murder patients until 2002, when his co-workers at a hospital in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, began to suspect him of stealing drugs that had no recreational value. At the same time, patients were dying in suspiciously high numbers, and that's when Cullen's colleagues finally put 2 and 2 together and realized that he was likely using the drugs to kill people. However, authorities shirked their concerns, and he simply moved on to yet another nursing job. There were numerous missed opportunities to catch Cullen over the years. Several of his employers suspected him of serious wrongdoing, but somehow he avoided legal scrutiny until 2003, when his final victim passed away in Somerville, New Jersey. By then, Cullen's co-workers and supervisors had caught him hanging out in rooms he wasn't assigned to, ordering drugs for patients they weren't prescribed to, and going through patient records that he had no reason to look at. After his first murder arrest, Cullen confessed to killing at least 40 people throughout his 16-year nursing career, although some believe he may have murdered as many as 400 victims. Authorities spared him from the death penalty in exchange for his cooperation in identifying more of his victims, and in the end he was sentenced to 18 consecutive life terms. Unfortunately, though, the plea agreement didn't require him to explain his motive for committing one of the worst murder sprees in American history. And to this day, he remains tight-lipped about his reasons for killing so many innocent people. Number 10. Jez Myon. Deputies at the Riverside County Sheriff's Office in Southern California received an unusual call one morning during the summer of 2022. Someone called to report that a woman entered a hospital in Moreno Valley posing as a recently hired nurse and tried to steal a newborn baby. According to authorities, 23-year-old Jez Myon gained access to a room where a new mom was staying with her infant and left the hospital with the child in her possession. Staff members said that they tried to stop Myron from leaving and called security, but she managed to escape. Meanwhile, the newborn's father chased after the suspect, and thankfully he retrieved his child before the accused kidnapper fled the scene. Riverside County deputies arrested Myron at her home the following day and charged her with felony kidnapping and felony child stealing. Inside the residence, they reportedly found ultrasound images from 2 other hospitals. Based on a bail declaration form, Myron confessed to posing as a nurse and said that she wanted to be close to a baby. Then, a few weeks after the disturbing incident, an attorney representing the victim said that Myron spent about 45 minutes in the hospital before walking off with the baby. Around 20 minutes of that time was spent in the new mother's room, where Myron allegedly pretended to be an employee and changed the baby's diaper twice. The specific details surrounding the incident, including whether the suspect knew the baby's parents, are unclear. But shortly after Myron's arrest, another new mother came forward and said that a woman claiming to be a nurse offered to take her infant to a medical appointment. At the moment, though, the case is ongoing. Number 9. Stefan Letter. Over a 19-month period starting in early 2003, more than 80 patients died at a hospital in Bavaria, Germany. Located in a quiet mountain community called Sonthofen, the facility served mostly elderly people, but still the number of deaths was suspiciously high. Staff members and administrators were especially troubled by the fact that many patients' conditions were improving when they unexplainably took a turn for the worse. As the mysterious deaths continued, authorities launched an investigation. They began to suspect that one of the hospital's nurses, 27-year-old Stefan Letter, was fatally drugging patients, and a closer look revealed that the sudden deaths began shortly after Letter started working at the hospital. And what was even more incriminating was the fact that every single death occurred during his shift. Known for his friendly demeanor, the seemingly good-natured nurse seemed like an unlikely candidate for a murder suspect. But as the investigation wore on, all signs began to point straight in Letter's direction. Authorities arrested him in July of 2004 and were shocked when he wrote a confession admitting to the murders of 10 victims. Letter definitely killed more than 10 people, but it was a good start for building a case against him. More than 40 bodies were exhumed as part of law enforcement's efforts to identify the victims. They were also trying to determine the exact number of people Letter had murdered. But while the total number is unclear, investigators connected him with the deaths of 29 patients. Many of the patients who died under suspicious circumstances were cremated, though, so there's an extremely high likelihood that there were more victims and that authorities will never be able to identify them all. According to prosecutors, Letter knocked his victims out with a sedative before finishing them off with a fatal cocktail of muscle relaxers, paralytics, and other drugs. During his trial, Letter's lawyer claimed that the murders were mercy killings and that his client believed he was helping his victims by putting them out of excruciating pain. But in reality, that wasn't true, according to other hospital employees, as well as investigators and experts who worked on the case. Many of the victims weren't seriously ill when they were killed, and while the vast majority of them were over the age of 75, most were in stable condition and showed no sign of suffering from any potentially deadly health issues. Some of the patients were even scheduled to be released from the hospital soon. Not all of Letter's victims were old. Some were as young as 40, and as prosecutors pointed out, Letter wasn't assigned to care for all of the people he killed, further suggesting that he didn't kill out of mercy, but rather because he enjoyed it. He was found guilty of all 29 murders that he was formally accused of and was sentenced to life in prison. And while it's unclear how many lives Letter claimed, the number of confirmed cases is high enough for his crime spree to be considered the largest case of serial killing in Germany since World War II. Number 8. Redonda Vort. The future looked bright for Adonda Vort in 2017. At the time, she was working as a nurse at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, the most prestigious hospital in the state of Tennessee. But she quickly became complacent at her job, and the results were both deadly and career-ruining. One of Vort's elderly patients was prescribed a sedative, but she mistakenly withdrew a paralyzing agent from the electronic medicine cabinet at her workplace. She wasn't paying close enough attention to what she was doing, and she didn't discover the mistake until after she administered the medication to the patient. But by then, it was too late. The patient had stopped breathing and was brain dead. Vort did the right thing and took responsibility for the fatal error. And during a hearing with the Tennessee Board of Nursing, she explained that she was distracted by a trainee. She also admitted that she'd acted carelessly and expressed deep remorse for the devastating consequences of her actions. Vort said that not a day goes by without her thinking about how she caused someone's death. The former nurse was convicted on felony counts of criminally negligent homicide and gross neglect of an impaired adult. She took a plea agreement that allowed her record to be expunged if she stayed out of trouble during her 3-year probation sentence. But as a result of her fatal mistake, she's permanently banned from working in the healthcare field. The case was highly controversial. Sympathetic nurses rallied around Vort, fearful that her conviction would pave the way for authorities to criminalize healthcare workers for truly unintentional mistakes in the future. Vort believed that the loss of her career and the ways that the incident forever changed her were punishment enough, and many people agreed. After all, she has to spend the rest of her life grappling with the painful awareness that she killed an innocent senior citizen in a moment of carelessness. She also has to accept knowing that a lot of people despise her for it, and unless she changes her identity and moves far away, her past will likely follow her around for the rest of her life. But Vort's actions killed a person, and many people believe that even if she meant no harm, she owed society a debt in the form of prison time. The widow of the victim wanted her to receive the maximum as far as convictions and punishments go, and felt that the outcome of the case amounted to a mere slap on the wrist. Number 7. Reani M Teles. A 23-year-old rookie nurse named Reani M Teles was just 3 days into her training at a medical clinic in Rio de Janeiro when she made a deadly and career-destroying mistake in 2012. While caring for an 80-year-old woman, she accidentally injected the patient's IV line with a half cup of milk and coffee that was meant for her feeding tube. As a result, the drink went straight to Palmarina Pires Ribera's heart and lungs, cutting off her oxygen supply and killing her within hours. And afterwards, Teles and 3 other staff members were accused of involuntary manslaughter. Living with the mental trauma of accidentally killing someone is likely tougher than someone can imagine without actually being in those shoes. To make matters even worse, Teles was also forced to face the horrifying realization that Ribeiro's death wasn't quick or painless. In the wake of the tragedy, nutritional specialist Dr. Armando Carreiro told the Brazilian talk show Fantástico that Ribeiro would have felt like she was suffocating. During an interview with the program, Teles admitted that she was aware of the dangers of injecting food into someone's IV line. She said that she'd never injected medication before, but that it was easy to get the IV and feeding tube lines confused because they were right next to each other. However, Dr. Carreiro disagreed with this claim, arguing that the lines were quite easy to differentiate one from the other. Teles accused the supervisor of failing to teach her and a fellow intern how to properly inject the coffee into the patient's feeding tube. But she admitted that she knew she wasn't qualified to administer the injection. She claimed that the supervisor sat at the nursing station playing on her phone instead of instructing and overseeing the trainees. Speaking with reporters, Dr. Carreiro said that he was convinced that the interns were ordered to inject the coffee. But he also pointed out that the trainees were instructed not to do anything without proper supervision. The director of the nursing school that Teles attended described her as an excellent student and confirmed that she was allowed to continue her training while the criminal case was ongoing. Unfortunately, though, the outcome of the case is unclear. Number 6. Will Davis. In 2017, patients at Christus Mother Frances Hospital in Tyler, Texas, began experiencing unexplained complications while recovering from heart surgery, leaving employees baffled as they tried to make sense of what was going on. Over a 7-month period, the conditions of at least 11 patients who were experiencing a stable recovery suddenly went downhill for no easily identifiable reason. And by the time doctors finally realized what the problem was, 6 people had died. Staff members solved the mystery after examining CT scans and seeing that there was air in the patient's brains. The most probable explanation was that someone was deliberately injecting oxygen into the victim's arterial lines. An investigation was launched, and it was soon discovered through surveillance footage that a nurse named Will Davis was in several of the patient's rooms just minutes before their complications began. During one incident, he stood calmly at the nurse's station while an alarm blared from a patient's nearby room that he'd just exited. A search of Davis's computer later revealed that he'd researched the effects of injecting air into a patient's line long before the suspicious deaths began. Then in 2018, he was arrested on suspicion of capital murder. Authorities alleged that Davis harmed at least 11 patients, 7 of whom died. And he was formally charged in connection with 4 patient deaths. Prosecutors said that they declined to bring additional murder charges against Davis because the cases were difficult to prove. However, they made it clear that they believed he killed more people than he was criminally accused of. During his trial, his lawyer argued that he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and that the evidence didn't necessarily point toward foul play. But the jury was unconvinced, and Davis was convicted on all 4 counts. Prosecutors pushed hard for the death penalty, and in their efforts to secure a capital sentence, they played a jailhouse phone call between Davis and his now ex-wife for the jury. During the conversation, the convicted killer's ex urged him to tell the truth about his crimes. And in his response, he said that he may have prolonged patients' illnesses so he'd continue getting enough overtime to pay the bills, but he denied deliberately killing anyone. According to the prosecution, this was a mere morsel of the truth at best. According to the state's narrative, Davis killed purely for fun. But the conversation in the recording revealed his first admission of any wrongdoing whatsoever, and it helped to show that he was a cold, calculating, and remorseless sociopath. So after deliberating for just 2 hours, the jury ruled in favor of capital punishment. And at the moment, Davis is currently appealing his case from death row. Number 5. Jane Toppen. Honora Kelly, better known as Jane Toppen, was born to poor Irish immigrant parents in Boston, Massachusetts during the 1850s. Her mother died from tuberculosis when she was young, leaving her and her 3 sisters in the care of an abusive, alcoholic father who'd earned the nickname Kelly the Crackpot. Then, when Honora and her sister Delia were 6 and 8 years old, their dad dumped them off at an orphanage for poor children, and they never saw him again. None of the Kelly kids went on to live a normal life. Delia became a prostitute and an alcoholic, while the girl's older sister, Nellie, ended up in a psychiatric institution. Unfortunately, given their unstable upbringing, these outcomes aren't all that surprising. But a traumatic childhood wouldn't be enough to explain the path that Honora ended up taking as an adult. By all appearances, Honora had the most normal life out of the 3 sisters. After leaving the orphanage, she spent several years working as an indentured servant for an Italian family who renamed her Jane Toppen. Then sometime during the 1880s, after being described as both brilliant and terrible throughout her younger years, she became a highly praised nurse at Cambridge Hospital. She was incredibly well liked among her co-workers and was known for her friendly demeanor, earning her the nickname of Jolly Jane. Jane was a big talker. She told grandiose lies, including that the Tsar of Russia had offered her a nursing job. And in addition, she openly celebrated when co-workers she disliked were fired. At some point, hospital administrators became concerned about her bizarre obsession with autopsies. But these strange traits were largely written off as personality quirks. It was no secret that Jane was eccentric, but she was likable enough for people to overlook her unusual behavior. Nobody seemed to realize that some of the things she said and did were red flags of much deeper-seated issues. On the surface, Jane's close relationships with sick and elderly patients and the long amounts of time she spent in their rooms seemed harmless, but she had no real interest in bonding with the people she cared for. In truth, she was experimenting on them with morphine and other narcotics to see what the drugs would do to them. And she did this because she became aroused by watching them lose consciousness and die. Seeing her victims in a helpless state turned her on, making her one of the strangest serial killers in American history. Jane Toppen murdered at least 12 people over a 6-year period as a result of her deranged fetish. She eventually confessed to 31 murders, but the true number of victims is unknown. It's also unclear exactly when she began her killing spree. In addition to overdosing her patients, she went on a poisoning rampage starting in 1895 when she murdered her landlord and his wife. Then, 4 years later, Jane killed her foster sister with strychnine, an extremely toxic alkaloid that's typically used as a pesticide. And just 2 years after that, in 1901, she moved in with an elderly patient named Alden Davis to help take care of him after she murdered his wife. And over the course of a couple of weeks, she killed Alden, his sister, and 2 of his daughters. At the urging of surviving family members, authorities performed a toxicology test on one of the victims. The results confirmed that they'd been poisoned, and in October 1901, Jane was arrested for murder. And her confession spilled out over the following year. In an odd twist, Jane insisted to the court that she wasn't insane. Today, an insanity ruling is preferable to a murder conviction, but this apparently wasn't the case in the early 20th century. Throughout her trial, Jane fought adamantly to be declared sane, because a murder conviction would come with the chance of eventually being paroled. But on the other side, being declared insane meant that she'd never see freedom again. She repeatedly declared that she knew what she was doing and acted with intent, which meant that she couldn't have possibly been insane when she committed her crimes. But despite these efforts, the court found Jane Toppen not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to the Taunton Insane Hospital, where she remained for nearly 40 years until her death in 1938 at the age of 84. Number 4. Gwendolyn Graham and Kathy Wood. Police in Walker, Michigan received a shocking report one day in October 1988. A man named Ken Wood entered the station and reported that his ex-wife, Kathy Wood, had confessed to murdering 5 patients at the nursing home where she worked as a nurse's aide. And he claimed that Kathy had admitted to carrying out the homicides with her co-worker, Gwendolyn Graham. When detectives visited the nursing home, the administrator told them that Kathy Wood was an excellent employee. Regardless, though, they took her down to the station for questioning and confronted her with Ken's accusations. At first, Kathy claimed that the whole thing was a joke, but the police continued to grill her, and she eventually began to share bits and pieces of the truth. According to Kathy's version of events, she and Gwendolyn Graham had met at work 2 years earlier in 1986. She said that they became friends, but things escalated, and after a while, they started having an affair. Kathy accused Gwendolyn of being both the mastermind behind the murders and the actual killer who smothered the victims to death. She further claimed that Gwendolyn got an erotic release from killing and failed to offer any other insight on the couple's motives for committing the disturbing crimes. The first murder took place in January 1987, when Gwendolyn allegedly suffocated an Alzheimer's patient with a washcloth while Kathy acted as a lookout. And because the victim's death appeared natural, no autopsy was performed. Kathy said that the murder cemented her bond with Gwendolyn by giving the couple a deep, dark secret that they believed would prevent the other from leaving the relationship. Then, over the next several months, the pair claimed 4 more victims between the ages of 65 and 97, including incapacitated residents who were completely incapable of defending themselves. According to Kathy, she and Gwendolyn made a game out of their twisted killing campaign, choosing each of their victims based on their initials in hopes of spelling out the word murder. Only 2 of the victims they killed hadn't been cremated, so police exhumed their remains in hopes of finding evidence to corroborate Kathy's story. But they found nothing, which isn't entirely unusual in strangulation cases. In the end, though, the medical examiner changed the causes of death from natural to homicide. Relying primarily on information from their interviews with Kathy to build a case, authorities arrested the women. They charged Kathy with 2 counts of open murder, while Gwendolyn faced 5 counts of first-degree murder. By then, Kathy and Gwendolyn had broken up, leading to speculation that Kathy was either lying or placing a disproportionate amount of the blame for the murders on Gwendolyn. She failed a polygraph test and eventually confessed to serving a bigger role in the crimes than she'd originally admitted to. But despite this, her cooperation with law enforcement in their case against Gwendolyn earned her a generous plea deal. Kathy pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder in exchange for a 20 to 40-year federal prison sentence. She's been free for the last couple of years, though, as she was released in 2020. To this day, it's widely believed that she was more involved in the murders than she ever admitted, even after she confessed to downplaying her role in the crimes. In a book about the case called Forever and 5 Days, true crime writer Lowell Caulfield speculated that Kathy Wood was insanely angry at Gwendolyn for leaving her. He asserted that she was so hell-bent on getting revenge that she put her own legal standing in jeopardy for the sake of ratting her ex-girlfriend out. And if that was the case, her plan worked. Gwendolyn Graham was convicted of all 5 murder charges and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, and as a consequence of her wicked actions, she received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 3. Daniela Poggiali. In October 2014, a 42-year-old nurse named Daniela Poggiali was arrested on suspicion of poisoning dozens of patients at the hospital where she worked in northern Italy. According to prosecutors, Poggiali was present during dozens of suspicious deaths at the hospital over a 2-year period. They initially accused her of fatally overdosing 38 patients with potassium chloride, a compound used in lethal injections in the US, and claimed that she may have been connected with as many as 93 deaths, and if that were true, it would make Poggiali the most prolific serial killer nurse in world history. Authorities also accused Poggiali of stealing money and valuables from vulnerable elderly patients and plotting to kill them simply because they annoyed her. But Poggiali denied having a hand in any patient fatalities whatsoever. However, authorities only grew more convinced that she was a killer after searching her phone and discovering photos of her laughing and smiling next to dead patients. In one image, she could be seen grinning and giving a thumbs up, while another showed her pointing her index finger at her face like a pretend gun. She admitted that the pictures were distasteful, but said that they were only meant to be seen by her and a co-worker who snapped the images. The disgraced healthcare worker described her decision to have the photos taken as a mistake and acknowledged her wrongdoing. But in the same breath, she passed the buck to her colleague who took the pictures, claiming that it was her work buddy's idea and that her former friend had ratted her out in a bid for revenge over a grudge. In any case, Poggiali insisted that she was no murderer. In fact, she claimed that she lived to help others. Nevertheless, she was thrown in jail without bail while awaiting trial by judges who described her as a public danger. Poggiali was convicted of 2 murders and was sentenced to life in prison. She continued to fight her conviction, though, and after spending nearly 3 years behind bars, her case was acquitted. But then, in 2020, the Italian Supreme Court reversed the decision and threw her back in prison. 10 months later, in October 2021, Poggiali secured another acquittal and was once again released. She won her freedom with the help of expert statistician Richard Gill, who successfully convinced the court that the statistics that were used against her at trial were flawed. After being freed, Poggiali told the press that she'd like to return to nursing. Some people might argue that she has every right to do so since she was cleared of the murder charges. But it's understandable that others feel as though the murder allegations and the disturbing photos with dead patients are reason enough to never let her return to the healthcare field. So, what's your opinion? Let us know in the comments below. Number 2. Benjamin Geen. While serving in the British military in the early 2000s, Benjamin Geen was stationed in a minor injuries unit at a hospital. But he seemed to get bored with tending to patients with non-serious medical problems and would often wander into the emergency department to get a taste of the action that comes with life or death emergencies. As a self-proclaimed adrenaline junkie and thrill seeker, he openly admitted that he was addicted to the rush. In 2003, Geen took a job at Horton General Hospital in Oxfordshire as a casualty nurse trainee, and much like his post in the army, a lot of the work involved treating patients with minor injuries, leading him once again to become bored with his job. Prosecutors would later argue that it was this chronic boredom that compelled Geen to inject various drugs into patients' IVs. Over a 2-month period starting in December 2003, 18 patients suffered respiratory arrests or depressions after coming to the hospital's emergency department with minor complaints. And out of the 18 people who experienced complications, 2 of them died. At first, the life-threatening respiratory arrests baffled staff members who failed to come up with a medical explanation for the sudden symptoms. But over time, employees noticed that the emergencies happened when Geen was on duty, and more specifically, when he was tending to the patients who fell ill. They also found it odd how he always seemed to know exactly what was wrong with the mysteriously ailing patients and what to do about it, even in the absence of a diagnosis from an actual doctor. Geen's bizarre behavior led to speculation that he did know what was wrong with the patients, not because he was good at diagnosing people, but because he was the one causing the medical emergencies. His co-workers became increasingly convinced that he was deliberately harming people, especially after noticing that he seemed elated when patients began experiencing life-threatening complications. So an investigation was launched, and police soon discovered that numerous patients who inexplicably went into respiratory arrest had been given a powerful and dangerous drug called midazolam. According to authorities, the 2 patients who died had received lethal doses of the medication. And these suspicions were supported by medical experts who agreed that an overdose of midazolam would cause the same symptoms that the victims had experienced. Police arrested Geen when he arrived for his shift one day in February 2004. During a search of his body, they found a syringe of vecuronium, a powerful muscle relaxant used in general anesthesia. The drug has no practical use in almost any other setting, especially in someone's pocket, and one of the patients who died in Geen's care had received the drug, furthering law enforcement's suspicions that he was a cold-blooded killer. Geen initially claimed that he'd forgotten to remove the syringe from the pocket of his scrubs at the end of a chaotic work shift, but the needle was visibly worn. It had clearly been used multiple times, despite the hospital's policy of discarding syringes after one use. Authorities then charged Geen with 2 counts of murder and 16 counts of causing grievous bodily harm. According to prosecutors, he enjoyed the thrill of resuscitating patients from life-threatening medical emergencies, and in 2006, Geen was convicted of both murder counts and 15 out of the 18 grievous bodily harm charges, despite his claims of innocence throughout the case. He was sentenced to 17 life terms, with a minimum of 30 years before he'll be eligible for parole. Geen continues to maintain his innocence from behind bars and has repeatedly appealed his case, but the guilty verdict and prison sentence have been upheld every time. And as of 2020, he'd exhausted all but his final appeal. Number 1. Kimberly Clark Sines. After becoming a mom at a young age, Kimberly Clark Sines earned her GED and continued on to nursing school in Lufkin, Texas. She became a licensed vocational nurse and ended up working at a dialysis clinic after being fired from 4 previous healthcare jobs. In addition to a checkered work history, Sines struggled with substance abuse. She also had an arrest record, which included public intoxication and criminal trespass charges stemming from a domestic incident in 2007. During the spring of 2008, an unusually high number of patients fell seriously ill at Sines' workplace. Paramedics were called to the clinic 30 times throughout the month of April alone, amounting to twice the number of calls to the facility throughout the entire previous year. A number of patients mysteriously fell into cardiac arrest, while at least one woman ended up in the emergency room on multiple occasions after repeatedly receiving too much heparin blood thinner. After 2 patients died from their mysterious sudden ailments, the clinic increased its administrative oversight. However, the unexplained illnesses continued to the point where responding paramedics become extremely concerned. They raised the alarm with their superiors, and a local official anonymously contacted the state health department. In late April 2008, 2 patients experienced sudden drops in blood pressure on the same day. Witnesses reported seeing Kimberly Signs draw a bleach solution into a syringe and inject it into the victim's dialysis lines. But when confronted on the matter, she claimed that she was using the syringe to get a precise measurement while cleaning an unused dialysis machine. This, however, not only went against the center's policy, but it also sounded extremely suspicious to the authorities. Further investigation revealed the presence of bleach in the bucket and syringes that Signs was using, prompting an immediate shutdown of the clinic while law enforcement was called in to investigate. As a result, Signs was fired from her job the next day, and her nursing license was suspended. And in addition, she was charged with 5 counts of capital murder and 5 counts of aggravated assault. One of Signs' co-workers told police that the suspected serial killer had expressed a dislike for numerous patients, all of whom either died or experienced life-threatening medical emergencies. Another colleague reported seeing Signs go outside to smoke after tending to a patient, and when the patient coded shortly after, Kimberly allegedly refused to help her. An expert chemist who analyzed blood samples of suspected victims testified that in at least 9 cases, he detected abnormalities that could only be explained by the presence of bleach. After entering the bloodstream, it caused patients' red blood cells to explode and release iron in a process known as hemolysis, leading to cardiac arrest and death. Then in 2012, a jury convicted Kimberly Signs on all counts. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, but she was ultimately sentenced to 5 life terms without the possibility of parole. Would you rather have a job you enjoy or land a dream job that requires you to relocate hours away from where you currently live? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.